The views and opinions expressed on Where Did the Road Go belong to the person speaking them. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of other people on the show or the show as a whole. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Bill Illuminati, Allison Cook, Yvonne Williams, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have back with me Mr. Robert Guffey. How you doing, Robert?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me back on. I think the last time I was on, we were talking about Jack Kirby.
We were, yes. And the people who liked Jack Kirby really liked that show, and the people who didn't know who Jack Kirby was apparently also really liked that show.
That's even better. I sent the link to that show to a friend of mine, and he said, he wrote me back, he goes, that was a good show. He goes, but you didn't tell the story about the time how you met Jack Kirby.
Oh.
And I thought, oh yeah. That's funny that it didn't occur to me to mention that.
Well, do you want to tell it now, and then we can talk about some of the other stuff you got going on?
Sure. It's a strange. See, when I start to tell the story, you're going to think that what I'm saying has absolutely nothing to do with Jack Kirby, but it actually eventually ties in to Jack Kirby. But you kind of have to go the long way around the barn to get there.
Okay.
This would have been in the spring of 1991. So it was about 3 years before Jack Kirby passed away. And I actually wrote about this in the 15th anniversary issue of the Mailer Review just recently. I wrote this autobiographical story called Shaking Down the Goon. And though in that story I kind of left out the Kirby aspect because I figured that would be like getting into the weeds. But my friend Bill and I, we were going to El Camino Community College in Torrance, and we're walking to class, and it's first thing in the morning, and, well, let me pause a moment to interject a brief trigger warning. There is no way for me to tell this story without using a language that would be offensive to some people, but since this is a story about a hyper homophobe, there's just no way to get across the full impact
okay.
without using the language that this guy used, okay? So,
right.
Okay, fair warning.
Okay.
So my friend Bill and I were walking past these tennis courts about 10 minutes to 8, and there's a horde of students are rushing past us in both directions, and Bill and I are not paying attention to any of them. We're just trying to get to class on time. And out of the crowd, this peculiar-looking student appears. He's like in his early 20s, tall, thin, cadaverous, sunken cheekbones, hollow eyes. He looks Middle Eastern. And Bill and I we're just, BSing about whatever. We're not even paying attention to this guy. Suddenly, as he passes us, he calls out, "Hey, did you leave your panties at home, faggots?" And Bill and I are completely gobsmacked. We turn to each other like, "Wait, what? Did we hear that, or what did he say?" And we turn around, and this guy has already disappeared. He's moves faster than any human being I've ever met in my life. By the time we turn around, he's already way at the other end of the tennis courts. He didn't run, just zip. He was teleported through a wormhole. And Bill and I were like, well, maybe he was talking to someone else. Maybe he wasn't addressing us. Who knows? So we need to go to class. Because we're enrolled in a psychology class, that has a special emphasis on human sexuality. That's the class we're headed towards when all this happens.
Of course.
So we kind of put it out of our minds, and we go to class, and we kind of just forget about it. Then 2 days later, it's 10 to 8. Bill and I are rushing to class, same exact spot near the tennis courts. A crowd of students, going back and forth, and out of the crowd comes this freaky-looking goon guy, and he says to us something like, "How's it going, faggots?" And now he says it while like looking directly at us, and his eyes are like orbs of fire, and he's just like mad with suppressed rage. His like face is crimson. And Bill goes, "What'd you say?" And I should point out that Bill is like the straightest looking guy you've ever seen. And Bill like turns around like, "What did you say?" Zip. The dude's gone again. He's just teleported to the other side of the tennis courts again. He's gone. And I say to Bill, like, we can't be late. We got to get to class. So we go to class. Again, a psychology class about human sexuality. Afterwards, we tell our professor, Dr. McCrary, who was the head of the psychology department at El Camino, we tell him this story, and he immediately says, it sounds like that man's projecting. He's wrestling with his own weird, complicated situation. He can't deal with it in a healthy way, so he's like projecting his own like inner struggle onto two random strangers.
Right.
It kind of astounds me how correct Wilhelm Reich was about almost everything. He wrote The Mass Psychology of Fascism, which the Nazis burned, and Reich claimed that authoritarians and fascists suffer from like frustrated sexual lives. And people kind of end up being cliches at the end of the day, but so often it seems like this is the case. There are many recent examples of that. But so now Bill's fed up with this guy, and he just wants to like tear him apart the next time we see him. And I said, now this is the spring of 1991. The Rodney King case is all over the news. It's everywhere. So I said to Bill, I go, "You got a video camera. Let's bring it next time. I'll hide it behind my back, and we'll whip it out the next time this guy says something messed up again, and we'll have it on record." And Bill goes, "That's great. That's a great idea." So the next Tuesday, I've got the camera behind my back. It's 10 minutes to 8. We're next to the tennis courts. Students going back and forth. Here comes the goon. And we're walking by him, minding our own business. We don't say anything to him at all. And then suddenly, this time, he doesn't say anything threatening to us at all. He just suddenly hauls off and punches Bill right in the face,
Oh, wow.
Which I catch on the camera. And Bill kind of has to hold himself back, and he goes, "What the hell is your problem?" And the guy goes, "I don't like faggots." And Bill goes, "Why do you think I'm gay?" And the guy's like, "Well, you look like one." And so what's weird is like I've had other friends at that time who dressed like Robert Smith from The Cure, but they never had anything like this happen to them. But for some reason, it's happening to us like right now. So Bill goes like, "You're crazy." And this guy, he's got like sweat pouring down his face, and his eyes are like bulging out. And he's going, "Well, I don't like faggots. You're a goddamn faggot." And he just kept saying that like over and over and over again.
Man.
And so Bill goes, well, we'll see what the dean has to say about that when we show him this tape. And Bill gestures towards the camera, and you can see on the tape, if you watch it, you'll see the moment this guy's expression changes when he realizes he's being recorded. And suddenly his whole demeanor changes. The kind of like the dark fury just melts into a sickly pallor, and he starts running after us, and now he's begging us, please don't show that to the dean. The dean, he told me something like this could never happen again. I was like, how many times has this happened, And he goes, Bill goes, "Well, you should have thought about that before," which is true.
Yeah.
And the goon goes, I'll give you money. And he pulls out his wallet. And if you see the tape, you see Bill, he stops walking, and he goes, "Well, how much?" And then the guy goes, "Well, this is all I've got on me." And Bill grabs $60 out of the guy's wallet, and Bill goes, "That'll do for now, now go away." And Bill kind of like waves his hand imperiously in the air. And the goon's like, thank you, sorry, man, hey, I just had a bad day, is all. It's like 8 a.m. I don't know, like, what happened to him before 8 to make him this enraged. But on the tape, you could see the faces of the other students watching all of this like go down, like they're very confused. What's happening? And Bill goes, okay, shut the tape off. We've got to get to class. So after class, we played the tape for our psychology professor, and he's like, yep, that guy's projecting. So Bill goes, well, what should we do with the $60? And I say, well, there's a comic book convention in LA this weekend, and Jack Kirby's going to be there, and it's $30 for a ticket. And Bill goes, that's perfect, because Bill was a huge Jack Kirby fan. So because this guy was gay bashing us, we got the money to go to the convention in LA, and I saw Jack Kirby on 2 panels. One was a one-on-one discussion with Neil Adams. So it was Neil Adams interviewing Jack Kirby, and now both of those, both Neil Adams and Jack Kirby are dead now. And the other panel, and comic book fans their minds will explode when I say this. It was a panel that had on it Jack Kirby, Neil Adams, Will Eisner, Marshall Rogers, the Hernandez brothers, both of them, and Tim Vigil. And I thought Tim Vigil was like the one. It was like, which person does not belong in this panel? But perhaps I'm being unfair to Mr. Vigil. And I recall Will Eisner kind of being quite rude to Marshall Rogers, and it was really weird. And after the panel, Jack Kirby stood at near the entrance, and there was these people kind of mobbed him. And when I say mob, I mean there was like maybe 25 people mobbing him. If it was now, it would be like hundreds of people mobbing him. But
right.
Kirby was there with both hands in his pocket, and he just kind of stood there immobile, and his wife, who's much taller than him, was kind of like the bodyguard. And she had all these drawings of Captain America and Captain Victory pre-signed by Kirby, and she was passing them out to everybody who was trying to get Jack to sign something. But Jack just stood there with his hands in his pocket, and I was like a few feet away from him. I said thank you. He nodded to me. That was the extent of the interaction between me and Jack Kirby. But later on, I realized the reason he was standing there with his hands in his pocket is because at that time in his life, he had difficulty. His hands would shake. So I don't think he wanted people to see, like his superpower was his hands, his drawing hands. I don't think he wanted the fans to see his hands shaking. So he was standing there, hands in his pocket, and his wife was passing out the drawings, because otherwise if he signed something, you'd probably see his hands shaking. And I think he was like self-conscious about that. That's my own theory. And so that's the story about how I met Jack Kirby.
Yeah, that's a crazy story.
When I met my wife, when we just started dating, I told her that story, and I could tell she kind of like, I didn't know, maybe she didn't quite believe the story, but I go, you can see the videotape. So like in the old days, the move was you'd say to the girl, I've got etchings up in my house or something. You'd show them drawings. My move was, you want to see this old VHS tape in which I'm getting gay bashed by some dude back in 1991. and I showed her the tape, and she was like, oh yeah, it did happen, exactly the way you described it. So yes, without him attacking us, without this guy, this insane madman attacking us, Bill and I would never have met Jack Kirby.
That's incredibly synchronistic, especially considering what class you were going to.
That's the other amazing part of it, was that every day after this would happen, we would go to the human sexuality class and talk about, strange sociopathic behavior connected to people who cannot deal with their own sexuality.
Now, I'll say in that time period, I got called that occasionally just because I had long hair. And it was usually rednecks in the area, generally older rednecks. I remember me and my friend walking past these two guys going into a bar, and it was like the son and his very drunk dad, who looked like he was maybe in his 60s. And he just starts calling us that, and his son's going, shh, shh. And like my friend's kind of playing it up, like mocking him and stuff. And it's like, okay, obviously the kid's smart enough to know this is not a good situation for them. But the thing is, like, it's not like we were dressing in, flamboyant outfits. We had concert shirts on and long hair,
Right. Yeah. I've never been able to quite figure out why he fixated on us, because it's not. I don't want to underscore negative stereotypes, but it's not like we were dressed like the village people.
Right.
So I don't know exactly why it is. Particularly Bill, who looked like, particularly at that time, the straightest, most cisgendered white guy you ever met in your life. That part was really peculiar to me, and I still don't quite understand it. There is a postscript, because several months later, my mom and I walked into Fox Drugs in downtown Torrance, and that guy was working there at Fox Drugs. So I actually went up to him and I go, could you, we want to buy this fan that's up on the shelf here. So he had to climb up the ladder, and then I said, you got a really nice ass, by the way. And then I just ran out before he could run down the ladder and come after me. And that's the last time I ever saw him. That's where the story I wrote in the Mailer Review, Shaking Down the Goon, it ends there. I don't go into the Kirby stuff because I thought that's just going to be that's too weird to even go into all of that. So it just ends there when I wrote the story for the Mailer Review.
Wow. That is a story. Oh my God.
It is a story.
Wow, where do we want to go from that? So the most recent thing you've released book-wise, what's the title of this? The Expectant Mother, but there's a subtitle.
No, it's The Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. That's the whole title.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought there was more. Okay. I got about halfway through this. It's absolutely fascinating. And how you've come up with some of this stuff is I have no idea. I'll read it and be like, I'll be like, is this real? No, this isn't real. No, okay. And then it's like, wait, is this one real?
Now, what's interesting is that you will come upon, books in Cryptopolis and Other Stories, which is my collection of short stories that came out, or we were talking about it, not the last time I was on, but the time before that. Yeah. Because it came out in January of last year by Leffe Press. And it's a collection of 25 short stories, and one of those stories is called Selections from the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. And so you get about 13 entries from this book. Now, I think a lot of people reading it would have assumed from the title that the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook is something like the Necronomicon or one of these imaginary books that a writer might make up and put into their own fiction. They probably weren't thinking that this is literally selections from the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, but indeed, that's exactly what it was. So you get the story in Cryptopolis, and then a year later, I published the book. Actually, it was less than a year later, because Cryptopolis came out in January of last year, and then Expectant Mother came out just before Halloween.
Okay.
Last year. And, I should mention, Cryptopolis has been nominated in the 23rd Annual Rondo Awards, which is named after Rondo Hatton, the actor who played the Creeper in a series of horror films in the 1940s. The Rondo Awards, it's not Cryptopolis and Other Stories is nominated for in the Best Fiction category. Now, anyone can vote in the Rondo Awards. So if you go to cryptoschatology.com, my blog, and look at the March 27th post, you will see my directions on how to vote for Cryptopolis in the Rondo Awards. And all you have to do is just send an email to David Colton, who runs the awards. You have to send it to him by April 20th, Hitler's birthday. I don't think he chose it because it's Hitler's birthday. I think that's complete coincidence. Yes, go to my March 27th blog post and you'll see the directions on how to vote for Cryptopolis. You don't even have to have read Cryptopolis to vote for it. That's how wonderful this is. Anyway, I thought I should at least mention that.
All right.
So The Expectant Mother is the full-length book version of that story that's in Cryptopolis, and I started working on it in way back in 2007 when my wife was pregnant with her daughter. And the average pregnancy lasts exactly 288 days. So I wrote a chapter a day, 288 chapters. And now some chapters are like a sentence long, and then there are other chapters that are several pages long. There's one chapter that the title is 10 pages long before you even get to the actual chapter. I was reading a lot of like what to expect when you're expecting kind of books, and I noticed that a lot of them are based on fear is the main emotion that's propelling the book, and the reason you're buying the book, and so it's based on fear and selling you something. And the fear is based on like what might happen to the baby if you don't do the right thing, even though this is a process that has kind of like played itself out over and over again, for time immemorial, and usually takes care of itself. So much so that there are teenagers who are pregnant and don't know they're pregnant until they're like giving birth, in the school bathroom.
Right.
So it was around this time that, and the best ideas I find come about from combining two ideas that don't seem to be related to each other. So it was around the same time that I began to notice how extreme, like right-wing conspiracy theories were beginning to look more and more like extreme lefty New Age conspiracy theories.
Yep.
And they were kind of slowly becoming indistinguishable. And I first noticed that weird overlap in the early 90s when you started to see like the militia movement and the New Age movement kind of showing up at the same lectures in Southern California. And there was a place called the Granada Forum where people like Bo Greitz, ex-Green Beret Bo Greitz, would talk about, like mind control connections to the Jim Jones massacre, or Linda Thompson, who was this libertarian attorney, started showing up with this documentary she had made called Waco, the Big Lie. And she claimed that like a flame-throwing tank had started the fire at Waco, which turned out to be total BS. But
Right.
You'd see all kinds of like different people at these meetings, these like New Agers, militia types wearing like camo fatigues, and like blue-haired old ladies who were like super concerned about fluoride in the water supply, and punk rockers and anarchists and evangelicals all like mixed together in the same room, like listening to the same speaker. And it's just this weird mixed bag of people. And for the most part, I noticed that the audience really liked to be scared. A lot of the emotion fueling a lot of the conspiracy theories, particularly the more outlandish ones, was fear. So these two things kind of combined in my head and collided, and I postulated the existence of, this is never explicitly stated in the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, but the reader kind of has to figure this out for themselves, exactly what type of people are writing the handbook. But I envisioned like a commune filled with evangelical New Agers obsessed with UFOs and conspiracies and weird ideas of all sorts, based somewhere like up north near Grass Valley, California. And this odd cult is living on some isolated farm somewhere, and they got some funky website, and people write in with their odd questions about what to expect when you're expecting, and the handbook is composed of these completely unhinged answers. But I first tried to sell the book in 2008, which was the year my daughter was born, and the reaction to it, I've only had this reaction to two manuscripts. One was Camelio, and the other was the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, where I would send it in to an agent or to a publisher, and generally you will get a response. No matter what, you'll, even if maybe it's a year later, you get some sort of delayed response, or a form letter. No, thank you.
Right.
We have no need for this. But with Camelio and the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, it would just be like silence, or it would be like a confused response, like, why are you sending this? What is this? Is this a joke? And the funny thing is, like, why would it be a joke? Like I'm going to submit a query to you as a joke? Like, I have better things to do, So, and Camelio got that response until John Oakes. I sent it to Or Books, and John Oakes, who's the head of Or Books, actually called me on the phone because I just sent him the query, which was about like 3 pages long. And he calls me on the phone. He goes, he says, "This is the weirdest query I've ever read." He goes, "Please send me the entire manuscript."
So now, what's a query for people who don't know?
And within a week, he calls me back, and he goes, I was reading this, and at times I would think, okay, he's just making this part up. But then I would go to Google, and I'd find the newspaper article that you quoted, and it was an actual article. And he goes, the whole book was like that. I would keep going to batch check what it is that you're writing about, and those things that I could check turned out to be real. Like, that guy's real. This actually happened, so he got it. He got the whole vibe of it, and thus Camellia was published.
Now, wait.
Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. That kind of, it never reached that level. It was just silence and kind of confusion.
For people who don't know, what's a query?
Oh, a query is like where you send, it used to be, like an actual letter in the mail or an email that would say, hey, look, I've just written this book. This is what it's about, and you kind of like try to pitch it, like a carnival barker trying to lure in the rube into the tent to see the Fiji mermaid. You try to interest them in the book. Would you like to read this to publish it? So that would be a query letter.
Okay.
With Expectant Mother, it was just like silence or like no response, and I realized in retrospect that I think they didn't understand what the satire was all about, because that intersection between like far-right conspiracy theories and far-left conspiracy theories wasn't really evident to most people until Trump and QAnon comes along. Then it's like, at a certain point you couldn't ignore it anymore. And so, and when I first wrote the book, I remember thinking, maybe this is too outlandish. Like, maybe a commune where there's a conglomeration of far-left nuts and far-right-wing nuts running a website, maybe that's just too nutty. Then, just recently, I saw the documentary Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God, which I highly recommend. And it's all about this religious cult filled with total loons obsessed with New Age mysticism and far-right conspiracy theories and far-left conspiracy theories and Christianity, and they're living on a farm, and the way they make their living is running this funky website. This is exactly what I was imagining when I came up with the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. Like, these are the people writing the responses to the questions that are coming in, as if I had brought Mother God into being or something. But I realized she already existed before I started writing the book in 2007. So I do not think I manifested her in reality, unless somehow I implanted her physically back before the timeline, which is probably not likely. So after I got these really positive reactions to the Salon and Evergreen review articles about where I was deconstructing QAnon and where all these various theories came from, I thought maybe the time has come to unleash this at last on the world. And I sent it to Madness Heart Press, the publisher, when I came across, I read a book called The Television by Edward Lee. Edward Lee is kind of like a legend in splatterpunk horror, and he wrote this book recently called The Television, which I thought was a fantastic title for a horror novel. I thought, if Marshall McLuhan had written a horror novel, it would have been called The Television. And I got this book, which was published by Madness Heart Press, and I read it, and I'm pretty, I'm not that sensitive when it comes to reading violence or gore on the page, but I actually had to set this one aside sometimes. I got to take a break from this. This is a little too much. And so I thought, well, if they didn't have a problem with The Television by Edward Lee, they're not going to have a problem with the madness that is the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. So I sent it to them, and John Baldesberger, who's the publisher, completely understood the vibe of the book, like, immediately. He got the humor and the satire, and they publish other. They published Christine Morgan, who I recommend. She wrote Sperm Jackers from Hell, and Nympho Shark Frenzy, which are two great titles that are hard to beat. So in a way, the book as it exists, because it's not exactly the same manuscript I wrote back in 2007, 2008, I went through it, and I decided that I took out some chapters, I wrote some new chapters, I cut it down from 288 chapters to 233, because I wanted like each chapter to be a home run. Like any chapter that I thought was something less than a home run, I took out. And at first I was reluctant to do that because the whole concept was the average length of a pregnancy is 288 days, therefore there should be 288 chapters. But then I pared it down to 233, and then I realized, oh wait, it's the Disinformation Handbook. It doesn't matter. I'll just say that the average pregnancy is 233 days. What does it matter?
Fair enough.
There's all kinds of disinformation in the book anyway. It doesn't matter. So the book is not exactly as I wrote it originally, and I'm actually glad that there was time in between, because when I was getting bounce on it, I just kind of put it aside and moved on to other things. I moved on to Camelio, and I wrote this novel Until the Last Dog Dies, and et cetera, et cetera. I just got busy with other things. So I think it was good that kind of the world went through, had to kind of witness the distortion of reality caused by QAnon and MAGA, so that they could actually fully understand where I was coming from when I decided to satirize this kind of strange intersection between far left paranoia and far right paranoia.
There's one of the chapters I highlighted starts off, and this is one of the things. Like, it starts off with something that is real, which is the sort of when a woman thinks she's pregnant but she's not, and she'll exhibit all the signs of pregnancy. And this is Artificial Babies Part 1. So I'm reading this going, okay, well, this is a thing. And then you start talking about them actually having an imaginary baby.
Yes, the artificial babies, there's at least 3 parts, because then there's the chapter about the golem, in which we go into Johann von Dippel, who, of course, was Johann Conrad Dippel, who was one of the inspirations for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And then we get into James Shelby Downers and Michael Hoffman's supposed research about the golem being created at the Trinity site in New Mexico in 1945. So we get into that artificial life. And then part 3 is about the Moonchild being created by Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard and Marjorie Cameron.
Right.
Of course, in which we learn that Jack Parsons was working at the S4 military base well into his 90s after faking his death in 1952. And Marjorie Cameron was burned at the stake by a renegade Catholic priest in Mexico in 1955, despite the fact that she starred in one of Kenneth Anger's films the following year. So there's a contradiction in the timeline. And then we also learned that L. Ron Hubbard was eaten by red ants in South Africa while searching for the buried gold of Cecil Rhodes.
Yes. What was the thing I highlighted here was scientists teeter on the brink of the synthesis of darkest dream of Kabbalists, a marriage frantically sought between E. coli bacteria from the colon of man, the genome code, and the power of the computer autonoma for the creation of a golem. A Kabbalistic substance was inside the giant steel bottle weighing nearly 500,000 pounds, with the U.S. government placed near ground zero on July 16, 1945, immediately preceding the first atomic bomb explosion, creation and destruction of primordial matter at the Trinity site in New Mexico.
Yes, that is a direct quote from Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare.
Really?
From pages 1 by Michael Hoffman, when Christine Morgan, who I previously mentioned, she wrote a review of the book on her website, the author of Sperm Jackers from Hell, and she said, yeah, if you just picked up the book and randomly opened to a random page, you might come to the conclusion that this is like some insane anti-Semitic text or something. one has to be plugged into the fact that the people writing the handbook are in fact a team of people, and in a way, it's kind of since I wrote this in 2007, 2008, it kind of presages QAnon in the way that QAnon was obviously being written by a team of different people, and that was something that was immediately clear to me when I was looking at the stuff, because I'm a literature teacher, a creative writing teacher. I'm used to analyzing prose styles of various writers, and I could immediately tell that this was different people writing it. And so back when I wrote this in 2007, 2008, when I started writing it, I wanted to give that sense that as you're reading the book, some chapters are being written by different people, I don't know if I was entirely successful in bringing that across, but
you are.
The idea is that you're reading a conglomeration of different people are answering these insane questions. And they seem to be like anti-Semitic and also evangelical and New Agers and obsessed with like UFOs and the paranormal, high strangeness, and also alternative health issues. There's several chapters about vaccines.
There's also there's also a chapter called Shakespeare Created Pregnancy.
Oh yes. That's a good one.
That is a really good one.
Oh yes, yeah, that's page 28. If allow me to read this one.
Okay.
It's only a page. Shakespeare Created Pregnancy. Each chapter is really about like a page long, roughly. That's the average length. According to the respected literary scholar and historian Harold Bloom, the biological process of pregnancy did not exist in humans until William Shakespeare created it in one of his famous plays circa 1600. The first reference to pregnancy in a Shakespeare play is Act 4, Scene 5 of Hamlet, 1600. Before that moment, humans had not yet conceived of the notion of procreating via sexual intercourse. Only the legendary bard of Stratford-upon-Avon could dream up such a poetic and yet utilitarian process. Bloom also claims that the cesarean birth was created by Shakespeare for his famous tragedy Macbeth in 1603, despite the fact traditional history states that Julius Caesar, for whom the cesarean is named, lived well over 1,600 years before Shakespeare. Of course, traditional historians don't understand that Julius Caesar did not exist as a historical figure until Shakespeare created him as the titular character of his famous 1599 tragedy. How Shakespeare's history could be retroactive is still not known, though it may have something to do with the rarefied field of hyperdimensional physics. Bloom sets forth various theories, each of them eminently reasonable, in his voluminous study published by Riverhead Books, Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. On a related note, reading Shakespeare aloud to your fetus can also reverse breech births. Bloom discovered that the best plays to read aloud for this purpose are as follows: Love's Labor is Lost, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, Measure for Measure, Macbeth, and maybe The Tempest. Bloom is hesitant to include this last play for various obscure reasons amongst Shakespeare's official pharmacopoeia. So that is a representative sampling of the nonsense that you'll get if you read the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. By the way, Mother's Day is coming up, so if you have an insane mother with a very bent sense of humor, you might want to get this for Mother's Day.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Oh, what is this? Another one that was thoroughly amused by was, should I allow my fetus to have play dates?
That is a good one. I like the there's if I get bit by a vampire while pregnant, will my child become a vampire as well? Because I know that's a question that weighs on a lot of people's mind. You'll learn about the dangers of allowing your fetus in utero internet connection, which involves implanting subcutaneous wires into the developing fetus that allow him or her to communicate with the mother from inside the womb via the internet.
Yeah, that killed me.
And some of those emails are actually included in the handbook. You can actually read the emails that the fetus wrote to the mother, and some of them are quite insulting, I have to say. You'll learn about muppetitis, which is after the fetuses are born, they begin to look like puppets. And then there's chapters about implanting newborns with subdermal identification chips. There's the Midwich disease, which affected a bunch of kids in the English village of Midwich back in September of 1960. There's 3 different chapters about fetuses from space. The uses and misuses of thalidomide, which is making a comeback in medicine, by the way.
Wait, what is it?
You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, thalidomide, the company that there's a chapter in here about thalidomide, which was inspired by a graphic novel by Peter Milligan. The British comic book writer Peter Milligan did a graphic novel all about this thalidomide baby who grows up and becomes a punk rock star in the 1970s. So there are references in here. There are like real deep dives. See, like a lot of people would read that chapter and not know that it's a reference to this graphic novel by Peter Milligan. So there has to be some sort of annotated edition, I think. I should get Leslie S. Klinger, who's like one of the foremost annotators, to do an annotated edition of the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook. But yes, the German company that made thalidomide has been marketing thalidomide for other purposes. I can't remember what it is. They're like, oh, it's good for migraines, or I can't remember. They came up with some other use for thalidomide. There's a chapter in here about Megan's Law that was actually inspired by. Do you mind if I read the Megan's Law chapter?
No, go ahead.
Okay. The Megan's Law website, www.registeredoffenders.org, is a useful research tool for the 21st century parent. Some neophyte parents go out of their way to avoid looking at the site, as the mere mention of the subject matter tends to upset them. This is no way to raise a child, ladies. In order to best protect your child, you must be intimately aware of the darkness that lies in wait for him or her in the untamed death pit that is the outside world. You and only you stand between your child and the bubbling mass of flesh-eating chaos called other people. Remember, the key to successful child rearing is control. Other people, however, are entities that cannot be controlled. Therefore, you must limit your child's contact with other people. Specifically, you must limit their contact with other people who might harm them. We realize that being a mother does not make you a telepath or a seer. The only way to predict which stranger might be a threat is to arm yourself with as much information and as many research tools to which the World Wide Web affords you access. One of the best of these tools is www.registeredoffenderslist.org. Simply click on the above link, then refer to the Megan's Law map. The red dots on the map will indicate the highest concentration of sex offenders in your area. We here at the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook know of at least one young couple in downtown Long Beach, California, who did exactly this and discovered 63 dots in a one-block radius of their apartment building. Not surprisingly, they moved soon afterwards. Without the Megan's Law map, they would never have known. One woman of our acquaintance discovered a big red dot on her exact home address. This is how she discovered that her new husband, whom she had met through the convenient auspices of Facebook and married on the fly in Las Vegas 3 months earlier, was a convicted child rapist. She requested a divorce via email 2 weeks later. Alas, as with any new technology, there are always services and disservices. Some convicted child molesters use the site in order to find like minds to hang out with, to party with, and plot new deviltry together. In fact, if you track the map on a weekly basis, you will see the red dots slowly converging toward one another. The day they form one giant red dot is the day to begin worrying. Will it be your neighborhood where the big red dot converges? Remain online and ever vigilant, parents. Beware the red dots. That one actually was inspired by the fact that my wife and I went online to the Megan's Law website and punched in our address, and boom, 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 there were like 63 dots around our address. And then indeed we did move soon after that. There's chapters on there's a full-length interview with Dracula about raising his son. That one's interesting.
You also have
my child die. What?
You also have a reference to the Twilight Zone with what if various objects and pets start disappearing around the neighborhood? Is my child wishing them away?
And there's also another one about your child falling out of bed and landing in another dimension.
Yes.
By rolling through the hole in the wall, which is the episode written by the great Richard Matheson. It's interesting, if you read the original story upon which that is based by Matheson, the original story is actually quite goofy. It's a comedy. The tone is totally different than when he adapted it himself for Twilight Zone. He adapted it the same idea, but now it had a very serious tone and was more of a serious horror story.
Yeah.
That kind of thing interests me. There's if my child dies in the womb, what are the chances of him coming back as a ghost? That one's good.
Fair.
Using your child as an assassin. Here, I'll read. This one's pretty short.
Okay.
I'll read this one. Using your child as an assassin is never a good idea, though the CIA has indeed trained dolphins to blow up enemy ships with bombs strapped to their backs. We here at the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook believe it would be immoral to brainwash children into doing the same work, no matter how effective it might seem. True, nobody would suspect a child of such an iniquitous deed, but strapping 12 tons of plastique to a prepubescent child's chest and pointing him in the direction of the local synagogue is, to say the least, rude. We don't advocate violence in any form, but if you insist on committing it, we suggest doing so with your own bare hands. Don't use your child as proxy weapons. Remember, children are not dolphins. One of the most infamous cases of child abuse of this kind occurred in Edo period Japan, circa 1680, when the infamous samurai assassin Ogami Ito used his newborn son Ogami Daigoro, a master swordsman before he was 4 years old, to slaughter about 156 billion people over the course of a few months, despite the fact that only 212 people lived in Japan at that time. No one can explain this discrepancy. The ultimate fate of Ogami Daigoro is unknown. We suspect he had serious psychological issues if he managed to survive beyond the age of 4.5. That particular chapter, inspired by the manga Lone Wolf and Cub, also a series of films, the Baby Card Assassin movies, made in the 1970s. I was very pleased to hear you say that the book was confusing.
Yeah.
Because I actually think it's good to be confused sometimes, and any worthwhile initiation will involve some confusion. No one has ever really learned anything important without being confused first, right? On one hand, the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, it's a kind of a silly, ridiculous, nonsensical book. But I realized in retrospect that it's actually saying something kind of serious, and I'm not even sure I intended this when I first started writing it. But in a strange way, it's exploring a theme that I first started writing about in the very first article I ever published in Paranoia, issue number 12, back in 1996, which you can find in my first book, Cryptoschatology. It's called You Name the Dwarves. And if the handbook confuses people, it confuses them, I think, in a good way, in a way that's going to entertain and uplift. Now, the bad sort of confusion, the kind that leaves you in fear and filled with rage towards somebody else, that's what propaganda does. So that's what what genuine disinformation does. That's what QAnon does. So that's what Newsmax does. That's what the Epoch Times does. It's confusion, fear, then hatred. Those are the three emotions that they want to instill in you. And you stumble across like some cleverly worded conspiracy theory on the internet, and it confuses you, and then it frightens you, and then it propels you into some sort of action. And pretty soon you're like shooting up a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., to save like non-existent kids in the basement, or and then now you're in a prison cell, wondering like, how did I get here?
Right. Right.
There's a quote that's attributed to both Andy Warhol and Marshall McLuhan, and it's not clear to me who said this first, but the quote is, "Art is what you can get away with." And later on, Robert Anton Wilson wrote a book called "Reality is What You Can Get Away With." So of course, propaganda is a form of art, and I mean, any construct that tries to alter human consciousness is art. Commercials can be art. Occult rituals can be a kind of performance art.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to intent. Like the very first article that I published, You Name the Dwarves. The subtitle was Surrealism, Advertising, and Mass Mind Control. And in that article, I talk about what I call guerrilla surrealism and corporate surrealism. And Andrew Breton and the early surrealists, they intended for their artwork to liberate human consciousness from, the psychological shackles that had confined it for so long. And it never occurred to Breton or Dali or Max Ernst or any of these people that surrealism would be hijacked by Madison Avenue and used to sell products to consumers.
Right.
And when Breton realized that they had done this, by the 1950s, it really shattered him. And I write a little bit about this in Hollywood Haunts the World, which is my next book. That'll be coming out from Head Press in November. But in You Name the Dwarves, which is, I think, chapter 4 in Cryptoschatology, I write about how guerrilla surrealists they were using their art to transmit messages of freedom. And then the corporate surrealists, they wanted to transmit messages basically of enslavement. And so like artists like Breton and Max Ernst and Dali, they were warping reality to help people see it more clearly. But then the anonymous admin, the corporate surrealists, they were warping reality to obfuscate its true meaning. So in the article, I examine how the former guerrilla surrealism is like a positive fantasy, and then the corporate surrealists were pushing negative fantasies down people's throats. And so, in a weird way, and I was just recently thinking about this, that the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, it's satire and it's intended to instill confusion in the reader, but that confusion is actually meant to encourage the reader to think. Yeah. Whereas a propaganda campaign like QAnon or other MAGA-related assaults on sanity, they're not intended to make you think, they're intended to make you react. And despite all the talk or analysis of QAnon being like an interactive role-playing game, the truth is it's not really interactive. Like when you read a novel, you're interacting with it. Your imagination is co-creating this literary world that the author has dreamed up. But the QAnon people, the architects of QAnon, or the people who are consuming the QAnon propaganda, they're not interacting with the creators. They're just reacting, and that's how they end up in prison after trying to like blow up the Hoover Dam or whatever. Right. So it's interesting how the book kind of ties into the disinformation aspect of the book that it's making fun of, kind of ties into my Operation Mindfulness book in a way that was unintentional, because I first started writing the book long before Operation Mindfulness. But I have a friend who used to work with the Library of Congress, and he once told me that he thought the main architect behind QAnon was some evil Robert Guffey doppelganger, like in the Soviet Union somewhere. And I feel like I could conceivably construct a mindfulness scenario like QAnon if I wanted to, but why would anyone want to do that? Like, why create fear and hatred and anger when you could just have fun instead?
Fair.
So, of course, the answer is obvious. There's more money in
fear,
in fomenting fear and hatred and anger. But if Robert Anton Wilson's right and reality is what you can get away with, why get away with messing with people's minds in a negative way when you could be massaging their minds in a different direction, in a more positive direction? So I would say the handbook is kind of like an attempt to massage people's minds in a more pleasant way. It's a more positive mindfulness, I guess is what I'm saying.
All right. Well, we got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Quick mid-show break here. Contact info and a recommendation. Contact info is simple. WhereDidTheRoadGo.com. And you can find everything there that you could possibly want to find about Where Did the Road Go. So head over there. You can find all our social media links. You can find all the shows back to the very first one, and a link to our Patreon. And with the Patreon, you get the shows a week or two early. You get them commercial free. You get the extra Patreon segment, which for this particular show is around an hour long. And extra stuff even beyond that. And it's only $3 a month. It helps out the show immensely. And just for $3. As is rating the show highly wherever you listen to it and sharing it with people you think might be interested. That's also a huge help. And I thank everyone who has done that. If you like heavy music, I also do The Last Exit for the Lost at thelastexit.org. It's more of an underground, mostly metal show with some other, metal adjacent stuff mixed in. It's not like anything you'll ever hear anywhere else. It's a very unique mixture of stuff. And a lot of times we do a lot of movie reviews and things like that throughout the show, depending on the week. As for a recommendation, I'm going to hesitantly recommend this one. I did enjoy it. It's called It's What's Inside. And it's a little bit of a mind F of a movie. It's on Netflix. And I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to give anything away. It's one of those things where you're watching it and you think you know what's going on, and then it turns out that maybe it's not quite what you thought. It's kind of neat. It's not amazing, but it's definitely worth a watch. So that's my recommendation. It's What's Inside. And like I said, you can check it out on Netflix. So there you go, my recommendation for the week. Now back to the show.
So I'm here with Mr. Robert Guffey. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Robert, was the drones and stuff. Because when that whole thing broke and disappeared very quickly, I want to note as well, you don't hear anything about drones anymore. Like, were you seeing parallels to the Camelio stuff in that?
Oh, absolutely. Immediately, and that's an interesting thing because it's almost like the opposite of the Mandela effect. People say, they start remembering things that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the opposite of that. People forget things that did happen just like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like definitely since 2020, there have been news incidents that have occurred that previously would have ate up like 6 months of media attention, and it's gone in like a day. Like in Nashville, the guy went up and blew up the AT&T building.
Yeah.
That would have been, if that had happened in like 1995, that would be like 6 months of coverage on that one incident.
Yep.
And everybody's like forgotten about it.
I actually forgot about it. You just mentioned it.
Well, right, exactly. And the drones eating up everyone's attention all throughout December and maybe the beginning of January, and then it's just gone. And then you'll get some sort of article about, it was like mass hysteria. Meanwhile, people were seeing drones that were the size of cars.
Yeah.
I remember, and this kind of thing would happen before as well. I mean, prior to 2020. Do you remember a strange news story? It happened in Riverside, California, and I've actually been to the hospital where this occurred. A woman was taken there, and suddenly she started exuding gas out of her body.
Vaguely.
And then all the nurses and doctors fainted and lost consciousness and just went down to the ground after smelling this weird gas that the woman had emitted from her body. This all happened, like I would say, like maybe 1994, 95, around that time period. Big news story. They covered it for about a week. The people in radiation suits, men in radiation suits went to go perform the autopsy on the body. They buried her in a lead coffin. and then later on, I'm reading the newspaper about 6 months later, and the mother, that woman who died, she was relatively young. Her mother, there was a newspaper article in the LA Times in this little column about her mother having died, and it said that when the police came to check on her, because no one had heard from her for weeks, they found that she had this metal door on her bedroom. And I've always wanted to look more into this, but later on, when they were talking about what had happened, even though I was seeing real live interviews with the nurses and the doctors saying, we don't know what happened. We brought her and she was on the gurney. Suddenly this gas shot out of her body and we didn't know what was going on. And boom, I just went down on the floor. and multiple like doctors and nurses saying this. Then later, like months later, I'm reading an article about all that, and they're like, "Oh, it was mass hysteria." And it's like, wait a minute, like these doctors and nurses just suddenly convinced themselves
Right.
that they were hysterical and they just lost consciousness, simultaneously. That's kind of like I immediately thought of that story when I saw these reports about the drones, maybe like in February, where it was beginning to tail off, and suddenly you see these articles about, oh yeah, it was mass hysteria. They were just normal kind of like drones that you'd see, that kids play with at the beach, and people just freaked out. Like, why would you see a normal-sized drone and then suddenly think you were seeing something that was the size of a car and is shining a spotlight in the windows of your bedroom?
Right, right.
It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Now, the interesting thing is, I did immediately think of Damien because in 2003, when he bailed out of San Diego, the first thing he does is call me and say that there's this little circular, what he said was a flying saucer, on his ass following him up from San Diego into Texas, into Kansas. And at the time, there were no commercially available drones. That just didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
But But now you can buy a drone, and they pretty much look like what Damien was describing in 2003. He said it was like a little circular platform, and it was following him around. And the other when his van broke down the side of the road, and these two like weird like redneck guys like pick him up and take him back to their house. They called me on the phone, and I was talking to them on the phone when one of them said, "Oh, he's right. There's this thing, this little flying saucer right outside our house that had followed him from the side of the road back to these guys' house." Right? And so all three of them saw that. So now then. It's like everything that happened to Damien in 2003 is happening to the whole world now.
Yeah, yeah.
The mind that was directed at him is like being directed at the entire world simultaneously, and it's weird how you'll see elements of his story like pop up in the mainstream news. Like if you go back and look at Camilio, you'll see how he told me he saw these weird leapfrogging robots on the beach, and the way he described them was he said they moved like a Ray Harryhausen figure, like Dynamotion, like those Sinbad movies from the 60s that Harryhausen made. They kind of move in a kind of weird herky-jerky fashion. Well, there's a corporation that specializes in making robots that move exactly in the way that Damien described back in 2003, and they're like humanoid, and they actually carry like your backpack. So they're meant to carry luggage or weapons for soldiers in combat situations. And then of course all the invisibility stuff is being reflected in the news all the time. There was a story about Ukrainians developing an invisibility cloak. It was in the news not long ago. There was an article about some sort of invisibility breakthrough in Japan back in January. I posted it on my blog. If you go to cryptoschatology.com and just look at January, you'll see the article and the link that I posted. And then you'll see it pop up in the form of popular culture in weird ways. In some of these things are, I think, on purpose, and others are just coincidence. But, for example, I'm sure you remember the Invisible Man movie that came out early 2020.
What was it?
It stars. It was the Invisible Man remake that Universal released early in 2020. It was just before the lockdown.
Yes. And
it stars the woman who's in Mad Men and she's in Handmaid's Tale. I'm blanking on her name. And I was watching the trailer. And it's about this woman who's being stalked by her ex-husband, and then suddenly you see in the trailer this invisibility suit, and the way it's depicted is exactly the same as the way Richard describes it in Camilio, with the lenses all over the suit.
Elizabeth Moss.
I suddenly, I haven't seen the film. I've only seen the trailer. Yeah. But I suddenly, when I saw the trailer, I thought back to 2016, fall of 2016. I went to Universal Studios and I went on the tour, and you're on the tram and the tour guide is telling you the upcoming projects that Universal is doing. And the tour guide says, yes, we're doing this new series of movies called The Dark Universe. And after all, Universal, it's clear somebody at Universal was like, wait a minute, we had the first shared universe before, the MCU. We should be, tapping into this success that the Marvel superhero movies are doing. So they were going to bring back Dracula, Wolfman, the Mummy, and all this and do separate movies, and they were all going to meet in one movie. And it was called The Dark Universe. And the first of these films was The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. So the tour guide is telling us, first you're going to have The Mummy with Tom Cruise, and after that there's going to be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie starring Russell Crowe, and then there's going to be The Invisible Man starring Johnny Depp, set in Victorian England, and it's going to be very much follow the original novel by H.G. Wells. I thought, that sounds interesting. So about a year later, in the summer of 2017, The Mummy movie comes out, and it tanks. It completely flops, the one with Tom Cruise. So obviously somebody at Universal said, okay, well, let's forget that idea. So they just scrapped the dark universe, shared universe idea. But meanwhile, they have these properties. So I think somebody at Universal said, okay, let's go ahead, Johnny Depp's in all this, he's got all these problems, so forget that. Nobody wants to see a movie set in Victorian England, forget that. Do some sort of modern twist on invisibility. Go find some sort of modern twist on it. And I think somebody went and started Googling invisibility and then either heard an interview or read Camellia or something, because it's exactly, the suit that is in the film is exactly what Richard describes. And it's like they decided, well, instead of like a guy being stalked by a team of people, it'll be this woman, she's being stalked by her ex-husband. So I think that there's a direct correlation between Camellia and that Invisible Man movie. But then you'll see it in other weird ways. Like, have you seen this TV series called Common Side Effects?
No, I've heard of it though.
I recommend it. I think it's very well written. It's a cartoon. Mike Judge is one of the producers. Beavis and Butthead, but this show is like as far away from Beavis and Butthead as you can possibly get. It's actually quite realistic. And the main character, I'm watching the first episode with my daughter, and the main character seems to be some sort of vagabond, like a psychonaut shaman guy. He seems like a homeless guy. He goes to his best friend from high school to tell her that he's being followed by these people. And you see a scene where the DEA are following this guy, but they want plausible deniability, so they farm out the surveillance to some sort of private security firm who are literally like gang stalking him, right? But they don't use that word. Me and my daughter are watching it, and my daughter turns to me and goes, "This guy is like Damien." And I go, you're right. He kind of is like Damien. I don't think that's the same situation with the Invisible Man. I think it's just a coincidence, but it's interesting. I told Damien about it just the other night, and he was laughing when I started describing the plot because he immediately recognized the similarities between that and his situation. But I think it is interesting that the writers are clearly familiar with this type of situation and put it into the storyline. There's also interesting references to Terence McKenna because the main character is, he's in Peru looking for these odd psychedelic mushrooms, and at one point you see one of the DEA agents is reading a book called Plant of the Gods, which is clearly a reference to Terence McKenna's Food of the Gods.
Right. And
whenever you eat this strange glowing blue mushroom, you enter into this kind of odd other dimension where you see these little elfin beings that look kind of like gray aliens, but they also kind of look like elves. So it's kind of like the replicating machine elves meme that Terence McKenna first started talking about. And then there's that like intersection with Whitley Strieber's Gray's imagery in there as well. It's very interesting. I actually recommend watching it.
Okay. Yeah, someone else recommended it to me and said it was very, very good. And I don't remember who it was, but it's on my list of things to watch. So you're still in touch with Damien?
Yes, I just spoke to him last night. And I would say that I would have been. He's getting better. He's getting into a space where he's told me in the past that it's very difficult for him to write down, to chronicle what happened to him, because every time he tries to do it, it's almost like he becomes overwhelmed psychologically. Like he can't even handle like writing it down, like putting himself back into that headspace to be able to write about it in detail. And I said, you should write it in like screenplay format, and that way you'll be kind of like an observer watching it, as opposed to putting yourself back right into the middle of the situation. Maybe it'd be easier psychologically to write about it in that kind of format. And he actually thought that was a good idea. So he's experimenting with that, and also he really wants to do a kind of graphic novel version of what happened, because he's actually a very good artist. I have some of his. The other day I was talking to him, and I go, I've got that big box of canvases that you mailed to me a few years ago. He took all these canvases and he folded them up and put in like the sketchbooks and notebooks and mailed them to me. And I've got this big box of these canvases in my garage. And I told him, I still have those. And he had no memory of having done this.
Wow.
This was a totally new. He was like, "Wait a minute, what? I did what? I folded the canvases and mailed them to you?" I go, "Yeah, there's like 24 of these paintings that you did." And he had absolutely no memory of ever having sent those to me. But
Wow.
I told him it'd be great if you could draw it, because that might also be another method of bypassing the kind of trigger effect that's going on when you try to write about this stuff, and it disturbs you psychologically. If you drew it, again, that might act as a kind of distancing effect, and you might be able to chronicle it in that format. So I hope that he's able to complete that at some point.
Did all this stuff stop for him?
No.
Oh.
But it's interesting how when the lockdown happened in 2020, I noticed that a lot of the gang stalking stuff that had been face-to-face for a lot of people suddenly went online. It was like when Michael Flynn trademarked the phrase digital warrior, which he did, he trademarked that phrase. The stuff that had been happening to Damien, which I describe in Camellia, where he would go to a town and he would get there and he would have the sense that someone had gotten there before him and kind of like spread really bad messages about him. Like they would go to someone and say, "Oh, look out for this guy. He's been talking about doing something," and it'd be really vague but ominous. And at first, Damien was just thinking that maybe this was happening based on the reaction he was getting from people. Then he later had it confirmed when he went and talked to a friend, which I mentioned this in Camellia. He goes and talks to a friend in Minnesota, and she says, "Oh, these two guys showed up at the door, and they said to us, 'Oh, have you seen your friend Damien? He, we're looking for him, and he's been talking about doing stuff. He said he's going to do something, so we're concerned.'" And so they would say in this way where they're not actually making an allegation. It's kind of vague, but it also sounds ominous, like, "Oh, what's that mean? He's talking about doing something?" And so that kind of thing of kind of spreading disinformation about people, that goes online. And then you end up with the whole QAnon situation of spreading lies about the dude who owned the pizza joint in Washington, D.C., that guy's a pedophile. I mean, they would spread those kind of rumors, with Damien and other people. That's a common thread that I've heard from people going back to just after 9/11, around 2002, 2003, when all this happened with Damien. I interviewed this one woman who used to be an actress, but now she's been dealing with the same kind of harassment that Damien's been dealing with. And she would talk about how she would see this happen. You know, they'd spread rumors about someone. That guy is a pedophile. And then once that sticks to you, you know, it's hard to get rid of it, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's always going to be in the back of someone's mind. Oh, well, I heard this rumor, you know. So instead of doing that face-to-face or hanging up like posters on people's houses or on telephone poles, now they just do it online. And they call themselves digital warriors. And people are getting harassed, you know, in cyberspace. So a lot of the face-to-face harassment that was going on post-COVID, it like went online. And so that's what I think that's the direct line between Camelio and Operation Mindfulness. In Camelio, one guy is getting surveilled and harassed. In Operation Mindfulness, it's all about a whole country, indeed a whole world, getting surveilled and harassed. So I see a direct line between those two books.
Have you had any offers for anyone to make a movie or TV series out of Camelio?
I got a offer from a production company, and the amount of money they offered was they spend more money on the pastries in one morning for the crew than they were offering me for the television streaming rights for Camelio. I have a feeling, because Camelio ended up on Flavor Wire's list of like the top 50 best independent books published in 2015 or something like that. My book was right above Kim Gordon's memoir, which was a source of pride. Since when I was a teenager, I wanted to marry Kim Gordon. I think they saw this on the list, and they were like, top independent books, oh, this guy doesn't have any money, so he'll just take whatever we offer him. So I said the money was so low, the offer was so ridiculously low, that my entertainment lawyer said, let's not even bother doing a counter offer. So that was one offer that came about regarding Camelio.
Because I feel like you could turn it into an interesting, like, short series or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that it would make a very good television series or film either way.
Yeah. Do you think a film would be long enough to do it?
Probably not. I think that, in fact, that was one of the problems I had with this documentary that was just done of Tim O'Neill's Chaos book, is that it was too short. There's a lot of information in Tim O'Neill's Chaos, and you couldn't possibly cover that in 96 minutes. It really should have been like a 10-part series or something, each an hour long. So I think that would be a problem with Camelio. I think probably it would work better as a episodic television show, or maybe a mixture of kind of like how I think the director who did Chaos also did Wormwood.
Okay.
Which was all about Frank Olson, and how they kind of mixed kind of documentary with fiction. I mean, you could go about it in that way. There's various ways that you could go about it.
I'd like to see that. I think it would be interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely potential there. Yeah, I can envision that. One guy wrote me and asked me if he wanted to. He was a screenwriter and wanted to buy the rights to it so that he could write the screenplay, because he said he could envision exactly how to adapt it. But I thought, if anyone's going to do that, I might as well do it.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever considered it?
Oh yeah, I have considered that, and it's just something, one of many various projects that I have not gotten to yet.
And what's the next book you're working on?
So the next book that's coming out is Hollywood Haunts the World, which is coming out from Ahead Press, and it'll be coming out in November. It's probably the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook is the longest book I've done so far. I think it's almost 400 pages. But Hollywood Haunts the World will be even longer than that. I think maybe more about 450 pages. And it covers 100 years of cinema history from 1921 to 2021, and it covers. It's gonna. There's the chapter. Various chapters are. There's 9 chapters. What's at the End of Main Street? The struggle between the artificial and the real in recent Gnostic cinema. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, The Box in the Desert, Bud Bedecker, Breaking Bad, and the 21st Century Western. There's a chapter all about the JFK assassination as seen through film. There's a chapter about Twin Peaks and It Came from Outer Space, and Jack Parsons.
Oh, wow.
And all of that. There's a chapter about The Man from Planet X, which is the very first invasion from space movie. There's a whole film about cinema and the art of perception management or propaganda. There's a film about surrealism and horror films. There's a chapter about the slew of evolutionary themed horror films from the early 20s and 30s. There's a whole chapter about the Phantom Carriage and from 1921. And Theosophy and Gnosticism and how all this relates to cinema. So it's a voluminous book, and I'm very excited about it. And you can see the cover if you go to Head Press and search for Hollywood Haunts the World. You can see the preliminary cover and some of the contents there.
Oh, nice. So is it completely written?
Yes, it's completely finished. All I have to do is proof it, which I'll be doing soon, and it will be available by early November of this year.
And what book number does this make for you?
Oh, God. That's a good... number 12?
Wow. What's your first one?
I think. The first one is Cryptoschatology.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And then Spies and Saucers, Camelio, Until the Last Dog Dies, Bela Lugosi and the Monogram 9, and Widow with Amputation, Bela Lugosi's Dead, Operation Mindfuck, Dead Monkey Rum, Cryptopolis and Other Stories, Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, Hollywood Haunts the World is number 12. Yes.
Wow. Huh. Do you have ideas for your following book already?
Yes, many.
I figured.
So,
are you planning
there are various manuscripts in various stages of completion, so I'm
Gotcha.
not quite sure which one will get the green light next.
Okay. And you do have your blog, and that's located where?
Cryptoschatology.com. And, I should mention, not the last time I was on when we were talking about Kirby, but the time before that, we were talking about John Keel.
Yeah, I wanted you to tell that story, but we're almost out of time, so I'm figuring we'll save that for the Patreon.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure.
So we're I don't think we'll have enough time to get to that story before we run out of time for the main show. So,
sure.
But anything else you want to plug real quick?
Let's see. Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook, available on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. You can, if you don't want to deal with an evil multinational corporation, you can order the Expectant Mother Disinformation Handbook directly from the publisher, Madness Heart Press, and vote for Cryptopolis in the 23rd Annual Rondo Awards before April 20th. So if you go to cryptoschatology.com to the March 27th post, you'll see the directions on how to do that.
Okay. Well, thank you for this, and we will continue this in a Patreon. I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. I can't do this without you, so thank you for supporting the show. And know that every positive thing that comes out of this show is partially because of you. I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons who are pledging $10 or more a month. Greg Ross, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Midnight Review Presents, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Abby Allen, Cherry Trapezoid, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Billuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Corey Nelson, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, Jamie Page, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Shurek, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mark Smith, Mothman Bren, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sasha McHale, Janet's Planet, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic Podcast, Verosh K., Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Victoria, Vincent Trewill, Will Cherry, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. All right, as I said, there's a Patreon-only segment for this show with Robert, and it's a good hour long, and it just keeps going. I want to thank Mothman Bren for upping their membership to sponsor level. I appreciate that very much, and if you want to become a patron, just go to wheredidtheroadgo.com, and you can do that and get extra stuff every week, and shows commercial-free and early, plus special stuff in addition to all of that. See you next time.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.
I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories, is the latest book by Timothy Renner. What compels a person to leave behind society, forsaking family, friends, and the comforts of modern life to live in solitude? The hermits of the 19th and early 20th centuries are as fascinating as they are mysterious. These enigmatic figures often became the focus of public interest, with newspaper stories turning them into local legends, folk heroes, and symbols of a life apart. In I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, you'll discover the extraordinary lives of hermits who defied convention. John Stink, rumored to have died and risen again more than once. William Woodruff, whose long vow of silence followed a broken heart. Brusher Mills, the serpent hunter who sold his own snake oil remedies. And Truman Commodore Downs, who claimed Mars as his homeland. These stories and many more reveal the complex lives of individuals who chose to live apart from the world. I Have Never Minded the Loneliness is available now at Amazon.com or wherever you buy books.